Alright, welcome back again. We're going to continue on with chapter 9.6, division of real numbers. So some ground rules we're going to set here is the first and most important one is division by zero is not defined. So anything divided by zero, and we could view this a couple of different ways. We could view this as anything divided by zero is not defined, or we say undefined, or does not exist. Pretty much we can't do it, not in our world. The next one is zero divided by anything, or we could view this as zero divided by anything, is always zero. Students get these two rules mixed up a lot, and there's quite a few different ways you can try to remember. Some people say under the line, implying that zero's under the line for the division, is undefined. So under the line, undefined. I like to think of it as eggs. This circle here, the zero is an egg, and if you sit on your egg, you squish it, it's bad, it's undefined. And when you have the egg sitting up top, it's okay, it's still an egg, so no troubles. Whatever you do to remember it, just keep it in mind and know these two separate rules. The other thing I want to make sure we tackle is anything divided by itself is 1, and anything divided by 1 is the same thing. So if you keep these rules in mind throughout, you'll be in the clear. So what we're going to tackle now is some sign rules for division. The rules are the same as multiplication. So if we have a positive divided by a positive, we get a positive. If we have a negative divided by a negative, we get a positive. So same signs, we always end up with a positive, and the same deal for when the signs are different. Positive divided by a negative is negative, or a negative divided by a positive is negative. So same rules as before. I'm going to erase them. So if you want to pause your screen to copy that down, go for it. Now, something that is always interesting for students is when we write division in the fraction format. Sometimes we have negatives, and they seem to just be floating out in the front, and you don't know what to do with them. That negative, there is only one of them. Either it goes up top, or it goes down into the bottom. But they all mean the same thing. There is only one negative at a time. If you were to write a negative over a negative, now you're taking a negative, dividing it by a negative, which we just said before I erased it on you, was a positive. So be careful. When there's one negative, it can either be in the numerator or denominator. When there's two negatives, it's positive. Same deal. We have an odd number of negatives, so it's negative. Even number of negatives, it's positive. However you do to remember it. Now, to help us with division, we're actually going to learn how to multiply, so to speak. I know that seems funky. Instead of dividing, we like to multiply by the thing called the reciprocal, or we call it the multiplicative inverse. The reciprocal's definition is the product of two numbers whose result is 1. So let's take a nice example so we can see that words in math sense. Let's say I have a number 1/3, and I'm going to multiply it by something because they use the word product. And whatever that something may be, I want the result to be 1 in the end. So if we go back and remember our nice rules, same thing divided by same thing is 1. So let's scoot back here. Well, if I put a 3 up top and a 1 on the bottom, 3 over 3 is really 1. And what we do is we call these things reciprocals of one another. So we would say 3 is reciprocal. And I even have it spelled right in front of me, and I spelled it wrong. So I'm going to abbreviate reciprocal. Oh my goodness, it is completely butchered. There we go. And we're going to say reciprocal of 3 is 1/3. And we can do that vice versa. 1/3 reciprocal is 3. We can think of this, I'm going to extend the page a little bit here, where if we have A over B, we want to multiply it by something that will get us 1. And the something we pick is b over a. So essentially what we're doing here is we are flipping the fraction. So whatever's on the bottom goes up top, whatever's in the top goes into the bottom. Now with whole numbers, you can always write whole numbers as a fraction by just putting them over 1. If you go back to your numbers here, our rules, anything divided by 1 is still the same thing. So we can take a whole number and write it as a fraction so that when we go to view our reciprocal, and I have to scoot down now, we can just flip it. To give us some more practice on that, and because I've been scooting pages around on you, let's go ahead and see this nice chart in which we have an original, we're asked to find the opposite, and the reciprocal. Now be careful, the opposite is for the additive inverse, the reciprocal is the multiplicative inverse. Two different things. Let's say our original is 2. If we want to find the opposite of 2, we just change the sign. But if we want to find the reciprocal of 2, we're going to view him a little bit differently. We're going to view 2 as a fraction. It's really 2 over 1. So whatever's in the bottom comes up top, whatever's in the top goes to the bottom. And the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. And we could see a similar thing. Let's say we have -6. So the opposite of that, we just change the sign, we make it positive. If it's negative, it now becomes positive. And when we want to see the reciprocal of it, we can view this guy as -6 over 1, in which whatever's in the bottom comes up top, whatever's in the top goes to the bottom. So we have -1/6. And you can write that in an assortment of different ways, just as we explained earlier with the sign rules. Let's get a little bit more dangerous. Let's see if we have a fraction. I don't know, 2/3. So what's the opposite? Well, it's positive, so the opposite just changes the sign. And the reciprocal just flips it. So it's already a fraction view. We take whatever's on the bottom, put it up top. Excuse me. And whatever's in the top goes down to the bottom. So now we have 3/2 for the reciprocal. Alright, fun one. 1. The opposite of 1, we just change the sign. It's -1. And the reciprocal of 1 is fun because what times 1 gets us 1? Well, 1 times 1. So the reciprocal of 1 is just 1. Kind of a neat one. The next guy, 0. He's a little bit more challenging. The opposite of 0, well, 0 doesn't have a sign, so it just stays 0. The reciprocal is a little bit harder to visualize, so you can view this as 0 over anything. Let's say 0 over 1. You flip it, 1 over 0, which under the line, or we squish the egg, it's undefined. So 0 has no reciprocal, which should make sense to us. Think about our definition. And let's scoot back to it. The product of two numbers whose result is 1. So we're trying to think of 0 times something, which gives us 1. But 0 times anything, it doesn't matter, is always 0. So that kind of nullifies our search. That's why 0 has no reciprocal. It is undefined. So you either say no reciprocal or you say it's undefined. Either or works for me. The next thing is, why are we finding reciprocals? They are useful for dividing fractions because instead of dividing, we can now multiply by the reciprocal. And let's see if I can spell reciprocal. Reciprocal. Okay. So let's see our first example. And we'll just do a couple. We have -3/4 divided by -5/11. So instead of dividing, we can multiply by the reciprocal. And we're going to use a nice little mnemonic, kind of like how we did keep, change, change. Well, here we're going to keep, change, and then you probably are guessing it, flip. So we keep the first part, we change to multiplication, and we find the reciprocal of -5/11, which is -11/5. And remember that negative doesn't matter where it goes, as long as there's only one of them. Now, We're multiplying fractions, which we know how to do. A negative times a negative gets us a positive. There's no simplifying, so we multiply straight across. 3 times 11 is 33. And 4 times 5 is 20. So our answer is 33/20. Now, let's say this was our first problem. Let's try a second one, a little bit more difficult. Let's say we had negative 1/3 divided by 15. Be careful. You don't want to simplify before you find yourself multiplying. So if you're trying to go, 3 can go into 15, stop right now. Make sure it's a multiplication problem before you do any reducing. So we're going to keep change flip. But now you're thinking, well, how do I flip 15? Whenever you have whole numbers involved with fractions, you want to go ahead and throw them over 1. It'll make life easier. So we keep the first part, we change to multiplication, and we find the reciprocal. Now, if we can reduce here, because we're multiplying, do so, which we can't, so we multiply across. We have a negative times a positive is a negative. 1 times 1 is 1. 3 times 15 is 45. And that is our answer. We can't reduce it any further. And until next time, that is all.